all those over the years who have campaigned to ensure that those in the workplace can have the degree of safety and security that they need. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the government's work to deliver Brexit by putting forward a new deal that members of this House can stand behind. We need to see Brexit through, to honour the result of the referendum and to deliver the change the British people so clearly demanded. I sincerely believe that most members of this House feel the same, that for all our division and disagreement, we believe in democracy, that we want to make good on the promise we made to the British people when we asked them to decide on the future of our EU membership. As to how we make that happen, recent votes have shown that there is no majority in this House for leaving with no deal, and this House has voted against revoking Article 50. It is clear that the only way forward is leaving with a deal, but it is equally clear that this will not happen without compromise on all sides of the debate. That starts with the government, which is why we've just held 6 weeks of detailed talks with the opposition, talks that the leader of the opposition chose to end before a formal agreement was reached, but which nonetheless revealed areas of common ground. And having listened to the opposition, to other party leaders, to the devolved administrations, to business leaders, trade unionists and others, we're now making a 10-point offer to members across the House. 10 changes that address the concerns raised by honourable and right honourable members. 10 binding commitments that will be enshrined in legislation so they cannot simply be ignored. And 10 steps that will bring us closer to the bright future that awaits our country once we end the political impasse and get Brexit done. First, we will protect British jobs by seeking as close to frictionless trade in goods with the EU as possible while outside the single market and ending free movement. The government will be placed under a legal duty to negotiate our future relationship on this basis. Second, we will provide much needed certainty for our vital manufacturing and agricultural sectors by keeping up to date with EU rules for goods and agri-food products that are relevant to checks at the border. Such a commitment, which will also be enshrined in legislation, will help protect thousands of skilled jobs that depend on just-in-time supply chains. Third, we will empower Parliament to break the deadlock over future customs arrangements. Both the government and opposition agree that we must have as close as possible to frictionless trade at the UK-EU border, protecting the jobs and livelihoods that are sustained by our existing trade with the EU. But while we agree on the ends, we disagree on the means. The government has already put forward a proposal which delivers the benefits of a customs union, but with the ability for the UK to determine its own trade and development policy. The opposition are both sceptical of our ability to negotiate that and don't believe an independent trade policy is in the national interest. They would prefer a comprehensive customs union with a UK say in EU trade policy, but with the EU negotiating on our behalf. As part of the cross-party discussions, the government offered a compromise option of a temporary customs union on goods only, including a UK say in relevant EU trade policy, so that the next government can decide its preferred direction. But we were not able to reach agreement. So instead, we will commit in law to let Parliament decide this issue and to reflect the outcome of this process in legislation. Fourth, to address concerns that a future government could roll back hard-won protections for employees, we will publish a new workers' rights bill. As I've told the House many times, successive British administrations of all colours have granted British workers rights and protections well above the standards demanded by Brussels. But I know that people want guarantees, and I'm happy to provide them. If passed by Parliament, this bill will guarantee that the rights enjoyed by British workers can be no less favourable than those of their counterparts in the EU, both now and in the future. And we will discuss further amendments with trade unions and business. Fifth, the new Brexit deal will also guarantee there will be no change in the level of environmental protection when we leave the EU, and we will establish a new and wholly independent Office of Environmental Protection, able to uphold standards and enforce compliance. Sixth, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will place a legal duty on government to seek changes to the political declaration that will be needed to reflect this new deal. I'm confident we will be successful in doing so. Seventh, the government will include in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, at introduction, a requirement to vote on whether to hold a second referendum. I've made my own view clear on this many times. I am against a second referendum. We should be implementing the result of the first referendum, not asking the British people to vote in a second one. What would it say about our democracy if the biggest vote in our history were to be rerun because this House didn't like the outcome? What would it do to that democracy, and what forces would it unleash? But I recognise the genuine and sincere strength of feeling across the House on this important issue. So to those MPs who want a second referendum to confirm the deal, I say you need a deal and therefore a withdrawal agreement bill to make it happen. Let it have its second reading and then make your case to Parliament. If this House votes for a referendum, it would be requiring the government to make provisions for such a referendum, including legislation, if it wanted to ratify the withdrawal agreement. Eighth, Parliament will be guaranteed a much greater role in the second part of the Brexit process, the negotiations over our future relationship with the EU. In line with the proposal put forward by the honourable members for Wigan and Stoke-on-Trent Central, the new Brexit deal will set out in law that the House of Commons will approve the UK's objectives for the negotiations, and MPs will also be asked to approve the treaty governing that relationship before the government signs it. Ninth, the new Brexit deal will legally oblige the government to seek to conclude the alternative arrangements process by December 2020, avoiding any need for the Northern Ireland backstop coming into force. This commitment is made in the spirit of the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, passed by this House on the 29th of January. And while it is not possible to use alternative arrangements to replace the backstop in the withdrawal agreement, we will ensure they are a viable alternative. And finally, 10th, we will ensure that, should the backstop come into force, Great Britain will stay aligned with Northern Ireland. We will prohibit the proposal that a future government could split Northern Ireland off from the UK's customs territory, and we will deliver on our commitments to Northern Ireland in the December 2017 joint report in full. We will implement paragraph 50 of the joint report in law. The Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive will have to give their consent on a cross-community basis for new regulations which are added to the backstop. And we will work with our confidence and supply partners on how these commitments should be entrenched in law, so that Northern Ireland cannot be separated from the United Kingdom. Following the end of EU election purdah, the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be published on Friday, so the House has the maximum possible time to study its detail. If Parliament passes the bill before the summer recess, the UK will leave the EU by the end of July. We will be out of the EU political structures, out of ever closer union. We will stop British laws being enforced by a European court. We will end free movement. We will stop making vast annual payments to the EU budget. By any definition, that alone is delivering Brexit. And by leaving with a deal, we can do so much more besides. We can protect jobs, guarantee workers' rights, maintain the close security partnerships that do so much to keep us all safe. We will ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. And we can bring an end to the months, years of increasingly bitter argument and division that have both polarised and paralysed our politics. We can move on, move forwards, and get on with the jobs we were sent here to do, what we got into politics to do. That is what we can achieve if we support this new deal. Reject it, and all we have before us is division and deadlock. We risk leaving with no deal, something this House is clearly against. We risk stopping Brexit altogether, something the British people would simply not tolerate. We risk creating further divisions. At a time when we need to be acting together in the national interest. And we guarantee a future in which our politics become still more polarised and voters increasingly despair as they see us failing to do what they asked of us. None of us want to see that happen. The opportunity of Brexit is too large and the consequences of failure too grave to risk further delay. So in the weeks ahead, there will be opportunities for MPs on all sides to have their say, to table amendments, to shape the Brexit they and their constituents want to see. Mr. Speaker, in time, another Prime Minister will be standing at this dispatch box. But while I am here, I have a duty to be clear with the House. I have a duty to be clear with the House about the facts. If we are going to deliver Brexit in this Parliament, we are going to have to pass a Withdrawal Agreement Bill. And we will not do so without holding votes on the issues that have divided us the most. That includes votes on customs arrangements and on a second referendum. We can pretend otherwise and carry on arguing and getting nowhere. But in the end, our job in this House is to take decisions, not to duck them. So I will put those decisions to this House, because that is my duty, and because it is the only way that we can deliver Brexit. So let's demonstrate what this House can achieve. Let's come together, honour the referendum, deliver what we promised the British people, and build a successful future for our whole country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of this statement. In fact, I received it yesterday when the Prime Minister made an appeal entitled Seeking Common Ground in Parliament. And where did she make that appeal? Not in Parliament, but in a small room just down the road. Mr. Speaker, it's now clear the bold New Deal the Prime Minister promised is little more than a repackaged version of her 3 times rejected deal. The rhetoric may have changed, but the deal has not. I thank the Prime Minister for her letter. It offers no change on a customs union, no change on single market alignment, and no dynamic alignment on environmental protections. This government is too weak, too divided to get this country out of the mess that they have created. For over 2 years, the Prime Minister bullishly refused to consult the public or Parliament. She did not seek a compromise until after she had missed her own deadline to leave. And by the time she finally did, she had lost the authority to deliver. That became evident during the 6 weeks of cross-party talks that ended last week. Talks that were entered into constructively on both sides to see if a compromise was possible. But, Mr. Speaker, while those talks are going on, Cabinet Minister after Cabinet Minister made statements undermining what their colleagues in the room were offering. The Foreign Secretary, Leader of the House, International Trade Secretary and Treasury Chief Secretary all made clear they would not tolerate a deal which included a customs union. While Tory leadership contender after Tory leadership contender took it in turns to make it absolutely clear that any compromise deal would not be honoured. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, no matter what the Prime Minister offers, it's clear no compromise would survive the upcoming Tory leadership contest. The multiple leaks reported from the Cabinet yesterday show the Prime Minister couldn't even get the compromise deal she wanted through her own Cabinet. And it's clear that the shrunken offer that emerged satisfied no one. Not her own backbenchers, not the DUP, and, Mr. Speaker, not the official opposition either. No Labour MP can vote for a deal on the promise of a Prime Minister who only has days left in her job. And even if the Prime Minister could honour her promises, the deal she is putting before us does not represent a genuine compromise. Her 10-point plan is riddled with contradiction and wishful thinking. Firstly, the Prime Minister pretends she's delivering something new with a temporary customs union. This isn't a compromise, it's just accepting the reality. Under the withdrawal agreement, we will already be in a temporary customs union through the transition period, which can last for up to 4 years. And if not, we will enter the backstop, which in effect keeps us in a customs union too, without any say. Secondly, why would this House legislate for a plan which has already been comprehensively rejected by the European Union? The government wants to align with the European Union on goods to keep frictionless trade, while at the same time wants to pursue trade deals which would undermine this process. It's simply not compatible. The technology they need to continue to pursue their Chequers plan simply doesn't exist. It's already been ruled by the EU as illegal, impractical, and an invitation to fraud. And, Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to provide any economic analysis to show this would make us better off. Why would the House support such a chaotic and desperate approach? Labour set out a sensible compromise plan over a year ago, including a comprehensive and permanent customs union with the EU that gives us a say, that would allow us to strike trade deals as part of the world's biggest trading bloc, bring investment while maintaining the highest standards. It's credible and achievable, and the best way to protect industry, manufacturing and jobs, something this government is woefully indifferent to, as the latest crisis in the steel industry shows today. The government must be prepared to step in and take a public stake to save thousands of high-skilled jobs at British Steel, a foundation industry for any major economy. Instead, the Tory obsession is for striking trade deals with the likes of Donald Trump. They prioritise chlorinated chicken, further NHS privatisation and deregulation over protecting supply chains and jobs in this country. On workers' rights, Mr. Speaker, we have yet to see the full package the government intends to bring forward. But many in the trade union movement remain very sceptical. As Frances O'Grady of the Trade Union Congress said yesterday, and I quote, "This reheated Brexit deal won't protect people's jobs and rights." On environmental protections, it's clear the Prime Minister is not offering dynamic alignment, and that under her proposals, the United Kingdom would fall behind in a number of areas, with only a toothless regulator under the control of the Environment Secretary in place of binding international commitments to protect our environment. Finally, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of a confirmatory vote, I'm sure nobody here will be fooled by what the Prime Minister is offering. Will the Prime Minister tell us now if this offer is genuine? Will she give her party a free vote on this issue, or will she, as before, whip against a confirmatory referendum? If the government truly believes this is the best deal for the economy and for jobs, they should not fear putting that to the people. Mr. Speaker, for too long our politics has been seen through a prism of leave or remain. This is dividing our society and poisoning our democracy. It means vital issues are being neglected, the crisis in our schools and hospitals, the housing crisis, and the cruelty of the social security policy and universal credit. Our country needs leadership to bring us together. However, this Prime Minister is not the person to do that. Throughout the last 3 years, she's made no attempt to unite the country. She's been focused only on keeping her divided party together, and it hasn't worked. And her time has now run out. She no longer has the authority to offer a compromise and cannot deliver. That's why it's time for a general election to break the Brexit deadlock and give the country a say.
Minister!
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I think I think the game was actually given away by the Right Honourable Gentleman when he made it absolutely clear that as far as he is concerned, the way to get this through the House is for everybody else to compromise to his plan and only his plan. In his statement, he was very clear that he was not making any proposals to compromise. The government has indeed compromised. We have recognised that there are issues on which this House will need to decide, and that is the plain fact. There are different opinions across this House on the two key issues of the future customs arrangement and the second referendum. I've made my position very clear on these. The government has set out its position, but it is for this House to decide, and the best vehicle to do this is within the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. So then this House can finally make its mind up as to what it wants the future customs arrangement to be and as to whether it thinks there should be a second referendum. He talks about free votes on a second referendum. Well, of course, in the indicative vote process that went through, we did indeed give Conservative members a free vote on this issue, and the second referendum was rejected across the House. He talks about he has some inaccurate comments. He talked about the environmental regulator. It will be an independent body which is able to hold the government to account on the issue of environmental standards. I think he showed his blinkered view on trade when what he sets out is, as far as he seems to be concerned, the only issue, the only people he wants to trade with are European Union. Actually, what we want to see is a good trade deal with the EU and good trade deals with other countries around the world. That is the best way forward for the United Kingdom. And he talked about British Steel, and I've answered in response to questions in PMQs on British School and what the government is doing. He talks about the Labour position of wanting a comprehensive customs union and of wanting all that dynamic alignment and that single market. I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that what the Labour Party wants to achieve in its relationship with the EU would make it even harder for a British government to take action to protect industries like the steel industry. He himself has always complained about state aid rules, but he would be wanting to tie himself into those state aid rules by what he is proposing for the future. But then, of course, what we see, he talks about different opinions. He talks about different opinions across this House. Of course, the one issue that has never properly been resolved in this House, and which the Withdrawal Agreement Bill would force to be resolved in this House, is whether the Right Honourable Gentleman himself is for Brexit or against it. If he is for Brexit, he will vote for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Voting against the Withdrawal Agreement Bill is voting against Brexit.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to my right honourable friend that this morning her Environment Secretary was on the radio, and when asked whether this was certain that this second reading would be brought back to Parliament, he didn't answer in the affirmative. He said they would take reflections and they would listen. My question, therefore, to the Prime Minister is, having presented this at the dispatch box, is she absolutely certain now that she will bring this bill back to the House for a second reading? And if so, could she name the date now and then say she would stick to it?
To my right honourable friend, we've already made the government's position clear in relation to this, that the second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be brought to the House after the Whitsun recess.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is customary to thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of her statement. It was some surprise that we all saw the statement being delivered not in the House of Commons but elsewhere yesterday. Can I ask the Prime Minister why we didn't follow the usual protocol and Parliament is the first to hear such statements from the Prime Minister? Mr. Speaker, let me give the Prime Minister some friendly advice. This deal is dead. Stop this charade and let's get on with putting the decision back to the people once and for all. The headlines this morning cry of doom. The benches opposite concentrate on ways to mount a leadership coup, and where are they? That's exactly what they're doing this afternoon, because they're not here to support the Prime Minister. This is no way to run a government. The Prime Minister is asking MPs to vote for a deal that takes Scotland out of the single market and eventually out of the customs union. This simply cannot be allowed to happen. This is a rookie government attempting to blackmail MPs. Look behind the smoke and mirrors. A new revised deal that hasn't even been negotiated with Brussels. A second EU referendum, but only if you vote for the bill. A possible temporary customs union which a future UK government could change and the European Union have dismissed. A trade tariff arrangement which the former UK representative to the EU has described as the definition of insanity. Mr. Speaker, none of what the Prime Minister announced yesterday was discussed with the devolved government in Edinburgh. This really goes to the heart of the problem. In December 2016, the Scottish Government published a compromise position. This was rejected without discussion. Scotland's voice has been ignored time and time again. Brexit has meant our power stripped away from the Scottish Parliament. There is no respect for the devolved administrations by this government. Westminster has ignored Scotland. Mr. Speaker, this is a sorry mess. Look around. There is no support for the Prime Minister's deal. Prime Minister, this deal faces an even bigger defeat than the last vote. Tomorrow, communities will make their voice heard in our democratic European election. Mr. Speaker, a vote for the Scottish National Party is a vote to stop Brexit. A vote to stop this economic madness. A vote to respect Scotland's decision in 2016. The Prime Minister has lost the confidence of her party. Parliament will not support her, and she has lost the trust of the people. It is time, Prime Minister, to go. Will you do it?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I think he talks about the discussions with the Scottish Government. Of course, there have been many discussions with the Scottish Government. Both I have met the First Minister, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has held a number of meetings. The Scottish Government, the devolved administrations have been party to the debates and discussions that have been taking place. But can I just say this to the right honourable gentleman? He says that a vote for the Scottish nationalists is a vote not to leave the European Union. Well, a vote for the Scottish nationalists is a vote to betray our democracy, a vote to betray the view of the people of the United Kingdom. People asked us in this House to deliver Brexit. We have a responsibility to do that. The question is how we do that. The Withdrawal Agreement Bill gives the opportunity to debate those issues about how we do that. And I say to the right honourable gentleman that this House should have those debates, come to the decision, stop ducking the issues and get on with the job the British people instructed us to do.
Sir John Redwood.
What does the Prime Minister say to the many members of the public who think the government should have kept its promise to take us out on the 29th of March with or without the draft treaty? And what does she say to those millions of angry Leave voters who do not see the agreement as any kind of Brexit, but a lock-in for many, many months with no clear way out?
Can I say, with the greatest of respect to my right honourable friend, that what I would say to those voters who expected us to leave on the 29th of March is that the government's position was that we should leave on the 29th of March. The majority of the government benches voted for us to leave on the 29th of March. Sadly, the opposition and some others voted to keep us in at that date.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Given that this bill appears to have been sunk even before its publication, the Prime Minister must know that the only way now to break the deadlock, which, as today's terrible news at British Steel shows, is damaging our economy is to
absolutely
put the choice back to the British people.
Absolutely right.
So can I urge her at this 11th hour to take that one final step, to change her mind and to say that she will support a confirmatory referendum?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, as I've indicated in a number of answers to questions this afternoon, I have not changed my view on the issue of a second referendum. I do believe we should be reflecting the views, putting into place the views of the people in the first referendum that took place on this issue. But I recognise there is a strength of feeling in this House on this issue, including from the right honourable gentleman and others particularly on his benches. And that is why it is important that we are able in this House to determine this issue. That is best done through the passage of the bill, through the passage of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, and that is why I said what I did yesterday. It's why I have said what I have done today on confirming that there will be a vote on a second referendum, whether to hold a second referendum in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. The government's position will be clear that we don't think it right to hold a second referendum, but it will be for members of this House to be able to come together and to determine that view. And for those who believe there should be a second referendum, to be able to put their case to the House and for the House to come to its decision.
Sir William Cash.
The Prime Minister tells us that if MPs vote for the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, which we haven't even seen, let alone the amendments that are going to be put down to it, then we would leave the European Union by the 31st of July. How on earth does she know?
Because I've been discussing, and business managers have been discussing a timetable for putting this bill through, and the timetable for, obviously, a business motion, programme motion, has to be agreed in this House. But it is very clear, and the result of the determination of the last European Council makes it clear that on the timetable that we would be possible to put through, bringing the bill back for second reading in the after the Whitsun recess, it would enable us to do exactly what I said and leave the European Union on the 31st of July.
Yvette Cooper.
Given the awful news about British steel, it's crucial that the government stands up for British manufacturing. The Prime Minister will know that a customs union is immensely important to manufacturing across the North and Midlands, and also that industry needs a long-term deal to support investment. So given the reports coming out of Cabinet yesterday, can she tell us, has the Cabinet ruled out a long-term customs union being part of the future partnership with the EU that they are supposedly going to negotiate after this withdrawal agreement? Have they ruled out a long-term customs union, yes or no?
Can I say, first of all, to the right honourable lady, she referenced what has happened to Greybull Capital's company, British Steel. She will be aware, as others will, that there are a number of issues, a number of challenges that are facing the steel industry, not just here in the UK, but globally. And part of that, of course, is the overcapacity issue, because supply is outstripping demand, and of course much of the excess production is coming from China. That is why in the G20 3 years ago, we acted to bring China around the table to try and deal with that issue. She asks about the long term. The compromise solution that I put forward and referenced in my statement on the customs is designed to ensure that a future government can take that issue in the direction that it wishes to take it, and for the House to determine what those negotiating objectives should be. What matters to our manufacturing industry is the frictions that take place at the border and having the benefits of the customs union in no tariffs, in no quotas. That is exactly what is already in the political declaration, the benefits of the customs union. As I say, we're committed to ensuring that trade is as frictionless as possible.
Nicky Morgan.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It's quite difficult to make any judgments about a bill when it hasn't been published. And if there were issues with PERDA, then the announcement should not have been made this week. Next week, this House is in a recess, which is very nice for all of us, but it's not needed, given the seriousness of the situation. I will probably vote for the bill when it comes back, but please can I ask the Prime Minister to reflect very carefully on whether it should be put to Parliament, because the consequences of it not being passed are very serious, And if she really wants to heal the divisions and to get on with it, I would ask her to reflect very seriously about this bill not being put to Parliament early June and being allowed more compromise, more time being taken.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that she is right that if the bill is not passed, then this House will be faced with a very stark choice, and that choice will be whether they go for no deal or whether they go for something which is either revoking Article 50 or a second referendum, with the intention that many have in asking for a second referendum to stop Brexit. And that will be the choice that will face this House, which is why I say, and people talk about the compromises that have been made so far. There are people who are telling me that I have compromised too much in the package that's been put forward. Others who are telling me I have not compromised enough in the package that has been put forward. At some stage, the House has to come together and we have to go and decide the distance that we will go together in order to deliver Brexit and deliver on what people asked us to do.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has referred a lot on this statement and yesterday to the new deal, the new Brexit deal, but isn't it a fact that the deal itself hasn't changed? The treaty is as it is, and these are a series of domestic legislative provisions to try to mitigate what is, in some cases, a very bad deal, but won't actually change the Brexit deal itself. And to illustrate that, the alternative arrangements proposal which he has put forward seeks merely to legally oblige the government to conclude its own processes, but which he confirmed that there's absolutely no obligation on the European Union to agree alternative arrangements, and indeed the final decision as to whether they accept them or view them as reasonable is entirely a matter for them. It won't even be a matter of objective assessment. If a member state government decides that they'd rather keep us in the customs union, then that's what will happen. There will be no means of getting out of it.
I say to the right honourable gentleman that we have put forward to the House today a package of proposals. It is a new package of proposals. The right honourable gentleman has been clear that in relation to the operation of the backstop, one of his key concerns was making that UK-wide. That commitment is there in the statement that I have made today, and as I said, we are happy to sit down and discuss how we can ensure that these are enshrined in law, which I know has always been an issue of concern to the right honourable gentleman. As regards the alternative arrangements, the groups to do that work being set up by government, the money being afforded by government to do that work. But the European Union were clear, and they have committed themselves in the legally binding commitments that have been made at recent council meetings, that they will also work with us to ensure that those alternative arrangements are in place and are available by end December 2020.
In Patterson.
Speaker, have the European Union agreed to any changes to the withdrawal agreement which are legally binding in international law?
I told you. I have said to my right honourable friend and others on many occasions, and the EU Council has made it clear on many occasions, that they are not reopening the withdrawal agreement. What we have done in the processes that we have that we took through the House up until now, into the most recent discussions with the European Union, is being able to have certain legally binding commitments made by both the UK and the European Union, in addition to the text of the withdrawal agreement, which cover a number of issues that have been of concern to people in this House.
Ms. Kendall.
Does the Prime Minister understand that she will not get enough support from members on this side of the House to allow her withdrawal agreement to pass unless she includes a confirmatory vote on the face of the bill? She has come to the end of the road. But if she, and indeed any Conservative MP, who wants to stop the Prime Minister's successor from inevitably pursuing a no-deal Brexit, they must back giving the public the final say. Time is running out. Prime Minister, please change your mind.
Can I say, this is an issue on which, as I say, there are very strong feelings across this House. I have met with members from all sides of this House who support a second referendum and have put forward their case with their sincere belief in that second referendum. I have a different view. I do believe we should be delivering on the first referendum, but I believe this is, because of the strength of view across this House, on both sides of the argument, it's important that the House has the opportunity properly to consider it in a way that is appropriate appropriate, and that is through the Withdrawal Agreement Bill.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the ironies of resigning from government is it gives you rather more freedom and emphasis when you choose to support the government rather than just oppose it. And I will be supporting the Prime Minister's bill. Can I thank her for her efforts and ask her to recognise there are still many people in the country who believe that the best future for the UK outside the EU is with a compromise deal based on the interests of both, rather than a reckless and increasingly bitter pursuit of a single type of no-deal leaving at the cost to many businesses, to industry, to agriculture, and a cost to the country, so expertly skewered by the Chancellor in his speech yesterday.
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I do indeed agree with him that I think there are many people across this country who want to see us leaving the EU in an orderly way and with a deal. And indeed, that was the manifesto on which he and I and those of us who sit here as Conservatives stood at the last election. We stood to deliver the best possible deal for Britain as we leave the European Union, delivered by a smooth, orderly Brexit, with a new, deep and special partnership, including a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union. Those are the objectives that I have been pursuing. I've put forward today a new package that does change the situation that has been voted on previously, and I hope all those who want to leave the European Union with a deal will indeed support it.
Tim Farron.
Speaker, in 1992, the Prime Minister and I toured the working men's clubs of North West Durham, and I was hugely impressed with her resilience in front of audiences that were as hostile to her as they were indifferent to me. But it turns out that the audience behind her is tougher still. She will fail in her bid in 2 weeks' time because people behind her who are for Brexit refuse to vote for Brexit. That is not her fault, but it is her problem. So for old time's sake, I want to help her out. If she will agree to put her deal, which to be fair to her is the only concrete version of Brexit we have yet seen, to the British people in a confirmatory vote, then I will join her in the lobbies. Will she help me to help her?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, and I fondly remember those days in 1992 up in North West Durham, but can I also say to him that I think if this House does not pass the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, if this House does not enable the treaty to be ratified, then what this House is saying is that it does not want to leave the European Union with a deal. I believe the majority of people in this House do want to leave with a deal. This is the vehicle to do it.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, may I correct my right honourable friend on 2 points that she's made today. The first, she said that it was up to the House to decide about a customs union and a second referendum. Can I correct her? It is not up to MPs to decide that. The country decided to leave, L-E-A-V-E, the EU. It's as simple as that. It's not for the House. And the second point, when she responded to my right honourable friend from Wokingham, she said that we couldn't have left the EU on the 29th of March. The legal position was that we could, but that she, and dare I say, a very heavily Remain cabinet, decided not to take us out.
Can I say to my honourable friend that I and my colleagues across government voted to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. We continue to believe that the best way to leave the European Union is with a deal. That is the manifesto on which my honourable friend and I both stood in the last general election, and I believe it's important that we recognise that and that we deliver that for the British people. The point that he makes about whether it is for the House to decide, the British people voted to leave. I have been trying to leave the European Union. I am looking forward to voting a fourth time to leave the European Union in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Sadly, opposition members and some of my colleagues have not voted alongside me in that way. But how we do that is a matter for this House, because the deal has to be ratified by this House, and government and this House have to determine what the objectives for the next stage of negotiations are going to be. Now, I've been clear that those negotiations will be taken forward by somebody else leading this government. But what I'm also clear about about is you can't get onto those second stage of negotiations until you get over the first stage. That's what the bill's about.
George Howarth.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's statement referred rightly to the need to avoid the risks that are inherent in the Brexit process. But doesn't she realise that her latest proposals actually hardwire those risks into the process themselves?
If the right honourable gentleman is talking about the issues on which there is a significant division in this House, namely customs and a second referendum, and taking those through in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, what the government is doing is committing to ensure that those issues can be addressed during the passage of the bill. The reality is, in the way legislation works in this House, that any bill brought before the House, people would put amendments, and amendments could be seen on a whole range of issues, including those issues. But the key issue is what is determined by this House in response to those issues. This House will have to come to a decision.
Mr. David Jones.
Speaker, on the basis of the negotiations thus far, what arrangements alternative to the Irish backstop does my right honourable friend consider are most capable of agreement?
Well, a set of proposals have been put before the European Union, which have a number of elements in them, bringing together both technological approaches, some of which can be, I think, improved as we see technology developing, but also the key issues that have been for debate so far and discussion so far are those around elements of the derogation from EU law, which would be necessary in order to enable the alternative arrangements to provide for the no hard border in the way that both sides intend it to do.
Ms. Savile-Roberts.
With respect, the Prime Minister is asking us to put our faith in her deal as, frankly, authority is slipping from her grasp with every passing hour. The Tories have had 3 years to agree a deal among themselves, including weeks of full-on collaboration with Labour, yet there's no guarantee she'll be in a place to bring this bill back next month. How, therefore, can we believe there's any guarantee of a people's vote when she cannot even bring herself to put it on the face of the bill?
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, she and I have a different view on the issue of a second referendum, but what I'm saying is that that is an issue which we will make sure that this House is able to determine. The Right Honourable Lady wants to ensure there's a people's vote, but it will be for this House to decide whether or not. Now, it's already been rejected by this House, but it will be for the House to come to a decision on that issue and the House to accept that decision.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We cannot continue to leave our country in this uncertainty. This has to stop. The whole House needs to stop saying no to everything on the table just because it's not our favourite dish. The EU negotiations, actually, they need to stop saying no to every time we have an issue as well. But we have to end this uncertainty. If we vote for this bill, we can move on and the discussions on the next stage can start. But, Prime Minister, what happens if we say no again?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that we do need to be able to move on, and we can move on while respecting the wish of the British people by taking this bill through, by ensuring that we ratify and that we leave the European Union. If this House chooses not to take this bill forward, then it is facing itself with a choice as to whether it wants no deal or no Brexit. That is the choice that will be available to people in this House. I still believe there's a majority in this House that wants to deliver on the referendum result, but to do so with a deal. This is the bill that enables that to happen.
Chukaramuna.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the House is going to reject the Prime Minister's deal for a fourth time, and she's indicated that she will then set out a timetable for her departure. She's also just said that there's no mandate here to leave without a deal, or indeed the country. So with regard to that timetable, if it is the case that a change in Prime Minister occurs near the end of October, leaving her successor no time to negotiate a further extension, will she herself request a further extension before the September recess to stop us leaving with no deal?
I'm afraid the honourable gentleman knows, I'm sure, my answer to that, which is if he really wants to ensure that we do not leave the European Union without a deal, then the best way is to agree a deal, and that is the bill.
Richard Graham.
The saddest irony that those of my colleagues who most want to leave the European Union have so far frustrated us from doing so by voting with Labour and the Scottish Nationalists. And the Prime Minister is quite right to highlight the dangers of Parliament not supporting the Withdrawal Agreement Bill the day before the European elections, which none of us on this side wanted to happen. Does she agree with me that the superficially seductive line from the Brexit Party, just leave on WTO terms, holds enormous dangers, above all for our farmers and for our manufacturers, and that this line would in fact cause the breakup of the United Kingdom?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he is absolutely right, particularly in the point that he makes about the dangers of a no-deal Brexit for the future of the United Kingdom, and that is a main concern and a key concern that I have in relation to that issue. But it is also, I think, surprising to see some of those who, at the time of the referendum, at the time of encouraging people to leave, were talking about leaving with a deal, about being like Norway, about accepting those sorts of restraints on the ability of the United Kingdom, now not being willing to accept what is a good deal for the UK, what enables us to ensure that we can leave with a deal that is good for the future of the UK. When people come to vote at the European elections tomorrow, they have an opportunity to vote for a party that not only believes in delivering Brexit, but can do it, and that is the Conservatives.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that this 10-point offer was framed after listening to the devolved administrations. Yet there's nothing in it to address the concerns expressed by Scotland's government, the cross-party majority in Scotland's Parliament, and the majority of Scottish members elected to this House. Now that her days of sneering at the democratically elected representatives of voters in Scotland are nearly at an end, does she concede that her successor will need a more intelligent approach to Scotland than she has felt able to adopt?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, we have consistently engaged with the Scottish Government, we have consistently engaged with the Welsh Government throughout these discussions and negotiations that we've had in relation to our future in the European Union. But can I also say to the Honourable Lady that what is important is that we all recognise the responsibility that we have to deliver on the vote that took place in 2016, Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, she says she doesn't have that responsibility. She is an elected member of this House, and she has a responsibility in the votes that she casts. She has said consistently that she doesn't want us to leave without a deal. That can only happen if we have a deal, or of course if we choose to stay in the European Union. She says that we have not listened to the Scottish Government. What the Scottish Nationalists have made clear at every stage is that they wish to revoke Article 50, they wish to go back on the referendum result of 2016, and they wish to keep the United Kingdom in the EU. The majority of the British public do not want that. They want a party in government, and they want parliamentarians in this House to deliver on what they asked us to do.
Bob Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly referred in her statement.
This is a most extraordinary situation. The Honourable Gentleman is seeking to ask a question, and he's been effectively heckled and prevented in a seemly way from doing so by the chuntering from a sedentary position in pursuit of Scottish tribal warfare by the Honourable Member. Calm yourself, man. The Prime Minister is perfectly capable of looking after herself. She was asked a question, she's given an answer. There can be differences of opinion and interpretation as to what is the responsibility of a Member of Parliament, and those issues have been aired. The Honourable Gentleman hasn't in any way benefited the mix by his disorderly chunter. Mr. Bob Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly referred in her statement to the importance of leaving in a way which maintains the closest possible security, policing and judicial cooperation with the EU 27 that we have at the moment. The Justice Select Committee was given clear evidence by the head of the National Crime Agency that to do otherwise would severely impair our ability to fight organised crime and terrorism and keep our country safe. Does she agree that to fail to leave without a deal, to fail therefore to pass the only available means of leaving with a deal, will be to put the security of the country at risk, and that is not something that any member of this House responsibly could contemplate doing?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the issue of security. It is one that is rarely raised in these debates. The majority of questions tend to be about the economic relationship and the trade relationship. But the security relationship is fundamental to us being able to keep ourselves safe. That's why I'm pleased that we've negotiated in the political declaration the strongest possible security relationship with the EU for the future for any country that would be outside the European Union. But of course, if we were to leave with no deal, then those security relationships would not be open to us. Could we negotiate some for the future? That is, of course, possible, but it would require that further negotiation, and at the point of leaving, those security relationships would be stopped.
Caroline Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Right Honourable Member for Loughborough, who's left the chamber now, but the essence of what she was saying was everyone should take a breath and take stock of what is on the table, look at the published bill when it arrives on Friday, but also, I think, to all colleagues across the House, be mindful of the results of the European elections. The Prime Minister has said several times already that if the second reading of this bill does not succeed, there will not be another opportunity to leave with a withdrawal bill. The only course and direction will to be leave without any deal at all. And does she agree with me that anybody on whatever side of the House, if they claim to be against no deal, they should give this proposition without any commitments right now? They should give this proposition due consideration, think about how they will amend it, and as my right honourable friend for Pontefract said recently in a newspaper report, stop the shouting and start agreeing on what we can agree to move forward.
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, she is absolutely right. And that is that the point of the process of legislation that we have in this House is that once we are beyond second reading of the bill, it will be open to members across the House to put amendments down to the bill and to have those debates about the precise detail about how we are leaving. But anybody who wants to ensure that we leave with a deal and that we don't see a no-deal situation should support that second reading, enter into that debate, and that debate itself, of course, doesn't make commitments as towards the end of that process. I would hope that we would see that bill being passed and therefore the treaty ratified, but it will be open to have that debate while that bill is progressing through this House.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Speaker, so often the Right Honourable Lady from Don Valley has spoken with a great deal of common sense. Would my right honourable friend spell out what she has heard would be the consequences for our economy of leaving without a deal?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, there have obviously been a number of bits of analysis have been done in relation to the impact of leaving without a deal. I think there would be an immediate impact economically of leaving without a deal. Now, over time, of course, we could restore our fortunes, but I think it is much better to be in a position where we're leaving with a deal, which will unleash, I believe, significant business investment in this country and see that positive future for our economy. That's possible by leaving with a deal.
Pat McFadden.
Mr. Speaker, I've been listening to the Prime Minister respond to several questions about the consequences of no deal. Given what's likely to happen in the European Parliament elections tomorrow and in the Conservative Party leadership election to follow, on which she has fired a starting gun, does she regret legitimising and normalising a no-deal outcome in the minds of the public through the repetition of the mantra, no deal is better than a bad deal?
No, I don't. And I think no government could have gone into a situation where it said that it would accept whatever it was offered rather than be willing to see no deal. If it had been a bad deal, then I'd stand by what I said in relation to that matter. But I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that anybody sitting in this chamber who believes that we should not have a no-deal situation has to support a deal. That is the only way of making sure we leave not with a no deal. So, and that the vehicle for doing that, for determining the details of that leaving, is the Withdrawal Agreement Bill.
Sir Peter Bottomley.
Unlike 1831, the 1832 Reform Bill got through because some of those who opposed the government did not vote against it, and that led to progress. Can I say, as a national interest Conservative, I have by choice voted with the government on every single vote because I think it's right. And can I say that I hope that others who think that no deal is bad and trying to reverse the referendum is bad, that the majority both of this party, this House and the country would prefer to see the Withdrawal Agreement Bill get through, at least get through the second reading, so we can make progress and have a chance of having a better future for our country.
Absolutely right. If we get through the second reading, we can then determine the details through the progress of the bill of the precise nature of our leaving. That will enable us to see progress for this country. And I believe, and just to pick up what my honourable friend said, I believe that it is absolutely in the national interest that we should leave the European Union, as the referendum vote said, but that we should do it with a good deal for this country, and that is what is on offer.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend asked the Prime Minister if she was intending to offer a free vote on the second referendum. I'd like to ask her the same question about the customs arrangements, which, as she knows, are extremely important for manufacturing industry. Would it be her plan to offer a free vote on those customs arrangements?
Say to the Honourable Lady that, as in the normal progress of these things, whipping decisions will be taken when we see what the proposals are that are on the table. But can I just also reiterate the point that I made in response to her right honourable friend, that it is not simply, when you look at the issues around manufacturing industry, the key issues that have been raised are, yes, the benefits of a customs union, those are in the political declaration already, but also ensuring that we're reducing the friction for trade at the border. That is not just about customs. It isn't just about customs, but the benefits of the customs union are in that political declaration already.
Oh, yes, a Lincolnshire grandee, Sir Edward Lee.
So grand, Mr. Speaker, but just a question. As the Prime Minister knows of my warm personal support for her, I voted for her deal not once, not twice, not 3 times. I have to say, as somebody who wishes her well and wishes this agreement well, I'm worried about the tactics of all this. I thought that we'd agree with the EU we were going to have binding indicative votes, which would have enabled people like me to express our opposition to a permanent customs union or a referendum and then vote for the withdrawal agreement. Now, when it's not necessary, because Parliament could do it anyway, I've been asked to vote for a bill which has on the face of it a nod towards a second referendum, which I believe would be disastrous to the Union and to the vast majority of people who voted Brexit. So can I just ask her to be very cautious, to listen to our party, to remember that the one vote we won was on the Brady Amendment, and if we can't get this through, given the incalculable disaster of losing this bill and not being able to bring it back again this session, that if necessary we'll think again and not bring it back.
My right honourable friend refers to the case of the indicative votes. Of course, what I'm proposing and what I've put forward is that during the passage of the bill, it will be possible to address these issues and come to those binding decisions on the issues, particularly the one that he references on the customs. Because the fact is, regardless of what indicative votes have been taken and what decisions have been put into the bill, had that been the way of we had progressed from those indicative votes on these issues, those matters would have been in scope within the bill, and it would still have been possible to for people to put other amendments down to those to that position, and for people to vote differently from the way in which they voted in the indicative votes. So that is why I think it is better to bring these matters to the point of decision, which will be the point within the bill where people are deciding not just to indicate a position, but actually what position comes into legislation.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that I sincerely want to help her get this deal through, a good deal through this House? But could she help me? My good common sense folk in Huddersfield, who are very clever people, they are saying to me, after 3 years, now we know the full consequences of leaving the European Union, why can't they have a chance to say what they think of the deal once it comes out of this House?
I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that, I mean, obviously I've responded to similar points from his Honourable and Right Honourable colleagues already this afternoon. But the point is that it will be possible within the debate on the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, and even the Right Honourable Gentleman wants to put a decision back to the people. Of course, it has to have a deal, as I think he indicated at the end of his question. To do that, that means getting the Withdrawal Agreement Bill through. But it will be possible for the House to determine within that Withdrawal Agreement Bill its position on this matter. The House has, as he will know, rejected a second referendum on a number of occasions already, but at the point at which it takes that decision within the bill, I think it will be making that decision in a different environment. But as I say, my position continues to be that we should deliver on the first referendum.
Choice between such distinguished colleagues. Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend must have noticed the response in this House and the response overnight to her statement. In proposing this folderol, is she going through the motions, or does she really believe in it?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I don't think I would have been standing here at the dispatch box and be in receipt of some of the comments that I've been in receipt of from colleagues on my own side and across the House if I didn't believe in what I was doing. I'm doing it because I genuinely believe it is in the national interest for us to leave the European Union with a deal. The only way to get a deal through is to get a withdrawal agreement bill through this House. There are issues this House disagrees on, and I believe those issues should be put to the House, and the House will determine those issues. And it will be at that point that this House and all members of this House will have to come to some decisions. At the moment, it has been possible through indicative votes to give indications, but actually they haven't been decisions that will be put into legislation. When the time comes to look at this matter, these will be decisions about what should be going ahead in terms of the government's position on this issue and what should be in legislation, and people will not be able to duck the issues. It will be necessary to come to agreement.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman doesn't need to chunter from a sedentary position like that. He's a very illustrious representative of Huddersfield. But the Honourable Gentleman for North East Somerset has just used a noun which I hazard a guess has probably not been used on any other occasion in this Parliament, or if it has, only by the Honourable Gentleman.
Because he's got a Lib Dem councillor.
We're grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. Mr. Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I welcomed most about the statement yesterday was its change in tone, markedly different from the ones that had gone before. Can I also express gratitude to the Prime Minister for the amount of time she has personally spent with members from across the House, including myself, through which she has disagreed with but engaged with in recent weeks. It is clear, though, that the contents of the statement yesterday has widened divisions, not actually healed divisions going forward. Can I urge her, in the 2 weeks before this bill comes before Parliament and this House, to carry on that engagement with an open mind and enter into discussions at least about what can be changed on the face of the bill going into the committee stage, in which case we will all have something to talk about at least. Otherwise, it's not even worth putting it forward in the first place.
Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, obviously I'm happy to continue engaging across the House as I have been, and I thank him for his comments. Can I also suggest that, as his Right Honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, said earlier, I think it will be helpful to all members of the House to wait and see when the bill is published what the actual terms of the bill are. He is encouraging me to put a position on the face of the bill with which I do not agree, but I think it is right that what we do in the bill is enable this House to come to a decision on that particular issue.
Hampshire Knight, who represents a beautiful forest. Sir Desmond Swain.
Out by the end of July, she says. A Brexiteer of whatever flavour could grant the bill a second reading, saving their reservations for committee and make their final judgment at third reading, couldn't they? And what is a folder roll?
Well, I think there are different definitions. A showy and useless item, allegedly, or an unnecessary or inconsequential fuss or something. But that's only the Honourable Gentleman's view of the matter. I'm not expressing any view on that matter at all. I was just intrigued by the endless lexicon of the Honourable Gentleman. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, I think when our honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset, used that word, he was not intending it to be complimentary about the package that the government has been put forward. Now, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, of course, for the bill to get through, for it to be ratified, for the treaty to be ratified, for us to be able to leave at the end of July. It's not only getting second reading through, but also ensuring that the bill is confirmed at third reading. But by getting through second reading, it's possible to have those debates within the structure as the progress of the bill on the key issues that remain, on the key issues in which there remain disagreement between members of this House, such that it will be possible, I believe, to come to an agreement that can see us leave the European Union.
Stephen Kinnock. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's made it clear that she does not intend to put a commitment to a second referendum on the face of the bill at second reading. In the spirit of compromise, therefore, would she commit to giving her MPs a free vote at committee stage when we come to debate and vote on that measure?
As I've said, what we will put on what we are intending to put in the bill is the commitment to have a vote on whether to have a second referendum, and that the bill cannot be ratified until that vote has the bill cannot be completed and treaty ratified until that vote has taken place. So that gives I hope the confirmation to members of the House who are in favour of a second referendum that issue will be addressed properly within the passage of the bill. As I said earlier, whipping decisions are for a matter that will be taken closer to the time. I note the keenness with which some members on the opposition benches have to determine what the whipping arrangements for the government benches should be, but with no reference to the whipping arrangements for their own benches.
Thangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister asks us what did it say about democracy if we put this back to the public. Well, the Leader of the Opposition has already said from the dispatch box that if she likes her deal so much, this is roughly what he said, if she likes it so much, she shouldn't be afraid of putting it back to the people, and I agree with him. And she's putting it back to us time after time after time when we've already rejected it time after time after time. So why doesn't she trust the people? Why won't she go back to them and ask them what she thinks of her deal?
I do trust the people. That's why I believe it's our duty to put in place what the people asked us to do.
Mike Gapes.
It's clear that after weeks of negotiations between a pro-Brexit Prime Minister and a pro-Brexit Labour leadership, we have not been able to get an agreement on the terms of this process. And it's also clear that no Parliament can bind its successor, and no lame duck Prime Minister can bind her successor. So isn't it clear this Parliament is unable to resolve these matters, and we should go back to the people in a people's vote, or if we are unable to do that, we should revoke Article 50 and then have more time to find a way forward.
Praise the honourable gentleman. The point about revoking Article 50 is it is absolutely clear from the court judgment that you can't just revoke Article 50 in order to create more time to consider a deal and then re-trigger it and go back into a negotiating process. Yeah. Once you revoke, and you stay in. I believe we should not be staying in, we should be leaving.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Excellent choice. In her statement, the Prime Minister said to address concerns that a future government could roll back hard-won protections for employees, we will publish a new workers' rights bill. Mr. Speaker, it was this government that rolled back these protections in the anti-trade union bill. So, will she then, if she's serious about workers' rights, will she reinstate these lost protections in this new bill?
It is this government that has been enhancing workers' rights. It is this government that is putting in place the recommendations that have come from the Taylor Review. This is the first government to actually look seriously at the issue of our economy of today and the workers' rights that are suitable for that economy. We've been enhancing workers' rights, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Alberto Costa.
Prime Minister, I will be supporting this bill when it comes to the floor of this House for the simple reason that it is the only deal on the table that will protect under international law the rights of British citizens living in the EU as well as EU nationals living here. I'm grateful for the comments you made last September following Salzburg about protecting unilaterally certain rights of EU nationals. I regret that there was no mention of British citizens in your statement. What message do you have to British citizens living in the EU?
Well, the message I have is a consistent one, which is that we have certainly been working for their interests as well as the interests of EU citizens living here in the UK. That's why I'm pleased to see the reciprocity we were able to achieve in the withdrawal agreement, and that's an important part of the withdrawal agreement and therefore the withdrawal agreement bill. I've also been pleased, and we continue to work with the other 27 member states to ensure that they are able to confirm that were we to be in a no-deal situation, which, as I say, continues to be the legal default, were we to be in a no-deal situation, they would also be ensuring the rights of British citizens living in those 27 member states.
Bill Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, there's obviously your deal, but others in this House want to leave on WTO rules. Some want Norway Plus, some want Common Market 2.0, others Canada Plus, and the list goes on and on. Which option do you think the people voted for in 2016? And how does the government know its option, which now defines Brexit, is the option preferred by the British people without asking them?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, he references the different opinions that there are in this House. That's precisely why I think it's important that we are able to crystallise those opinions to a position that can command a majority across this House. I think what people voted for when they voted in 2016, they voted to leave the EU, to end free movement, to ensure that our courts were supreme here, to ensure we weren't sending those vast annual sums to the European Union. They wanted us to be that independent nation. I believe an independent trade policy is part of that independence, and that is why I've put forward the position and supported the position I have in the past in relation to these matters around customs. But it will be for the House to determine the customs union objectives, and that's what we're talking about, the objectives for future negotiations.
Dr. Rupa Haq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the inevitable end nigh for the Prime Minister, and us still in the EU, in an extension to an extension, and several burning injustices still unextinguished everywhere, I wondered, could she tell us, under her premiership, factoring in the 2 new government ministries she created, the civil servants from all over redeployed to this exercise, and her costly and sometimes incompetent no-deal planning experiments. Now she's telling us that's such a bad thing. How much has Brexit cost the public purse?
I mean, she shouldn't have. The Honourable Lady knows full well that the figures that the Treasury have made available for 2 departments to prepare for Brexit, in whatever form that takes, have indeed been made public. But she talks about alludes to other work that this government has undertaken. I'm very pleased that this government introduced, for example, the race disparity audit, that we are taking action to ensure that those in certain communities who find it harder to get into the workplace are given the support that they need in order to be able to do this. That we have been able to introduce changes are introducing changes to domestic abuse legislation. There are many areas where this government is acting to deal with exactly the injustices that I have referred to previously.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows that her promises are only valid for as long as she's Prime Minister, which is probably be measured now in hours rather than days, because her successor can tear them up. So even if the House was to vote for what's come to be known as May's Brexit mayhem, we could land up with Boris's Brexit Buruk. Is it any surprise that the people of Scotland are not prepared to accept that the people of Scotland tomorrow will once again declare our determination that our nation will remain in the European Union, and if the Prime Minister's nation insists on leaving, they better reconcile themselves to the fact that they're leaving without us?
For those people of Scotland who want to ensure that we leave the European Union with a good deal for the whole United Kingdom, including Scotland, there is only one party to vote for, and that is the Conservatives. And for the people of Scotland who want to ensure that Scotland remains in the most important union for it, economically and in other ways, the United Kingdom is to vote Conservative.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister states that those of us seeking a public vote should support her withdrawal agreement and during the second reading to make our own case to Parliament. But we have already and repeatedly made our case in this chamber for a public confirmatory vote. If the Prime Minister wishes to be bold with a new offer, she must allow the public a voice on her deal, which is democratic. Does she agree?
Thanks, the Honourable Lady. I think I answered that question earlier, and I refer her to the answer that I gave.
Tom Brake.
Speaker. At the latest count, 8 ministers or members of Parliament who sit beside or around the Prime Minister are jostling for her job. Most, if not all of them, appear to be enthusiastic endorsers of a kamikaze no deal. Given what she knows about no deal, can she understand why any of those candidates would want to advocate that?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he can leave the issue of the determination of the leadership of the Conservative Party to the Conservative Party. What this House has to decide is whether it wants to leave the European Union with a deal or without a deal. Withdrawal Agreement Bill is the vehicle that enables us to ensure that we leave with a deal.
Cat Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's been very clear that she believes that the deal she has is what the public want, but she's also very clear that she's not supporting a second referendum or confirmatory vote. Does she see the inconsistencies in those arguments? And frankly, what's she scared of?
There's no suggestion. Look, it's very simple. The House, the issue of a second referendum will be one that, as I say, if we get through second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, it will be possible for people who wish to see that second referendum to put that case to the House and the House to come to a decision on that matter. I have made changes to the offer that I have put forward. I've set those out today in the statement to the House that I have given. Those have reflected the discussions that we've been having across this House and addressed concerns that have been raised by members of this House.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the Prime Minister's statement she talks a lot about compromise, and I agree, I think that there is an element of compromise that's required. But since the referendum result in 2016, the Scottish Government has sought to compromise. So can she tell me, just name one single part of the document, Scotland's Place in Europe, that she agreed to compromise on?
Say to the honourable gentleman, yes, indeed, we have had discussions with both the Scottish and Welsh governments about their concern, particularly about trade across the European Union, and the proposals that we have put forward have reflected those concerns, together with the discussions that we've had with business across the whole of the United Kingdom. The position, as I understand it, of the Scottish Nationalists now is that they want to revoke Article 50. That is not the position. That is not a compromise. That is not a compromise. That is a position that goes back on the result of the referendum.
Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, MPs from around the House have suggested that her deal isn't sustainable because she's announced her resignation and it isn't future-proofed. But would she agree with me that it's not just her deal, but any deal cannot be future-proofed unless it's entrenched by a public confirmatory vote, so that it's sustainable, and therefore on that basis, if she wants to heal the wounds and make it sustainable, she should put that public confirmatory vote on the bill itself.
The honourable gentleman, no, I'm afraid he is wrong. The point about the concern that people have about entrenching for the future is about the objectives for negotiating in the future stages. Those will not be determined by a people's vote, by a second referendum, because by definition they will be part of negotiation with the European Union in the future. So nobody can say what is going to, at this stage, what will absolutely come out of those negotiations. It will be part of a process.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, I spent 24 years on the front line of the NHS, and like the vast majority of clinicians, I'm desperately worried about the impact of a no-deal Brexit, a WTO Brexit, on the NHS, on social care, science and research and public health. And I really want to help the Prime Minister get her deal across the line if it's subject to a confirmatory vote, because I don't believe it has the consent even of the loudest voices for Brexiteers, let alone constituents across this nation. Would she please commit to ending all of this, because her deal would get across the line with the support from so many colleagues across this House if she would just agree to make it sure that it genuinely is the will of the people?
Can I say to the honourable lady that if she wants to ensure that we are not leaving without a deal, and she wants to press the case for a second referendum, then the way to do that is to vote for second reading of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, and then during the progress of that bill we'll be able to have that debate about a second referendum, and indeed about other issues on which there is disagreement across this House, and come to a determination on them. That is the proper process to follow. It's the process that enables this House to take that decision.
Rachel Maskell.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we're getting the same withdrawal agreement coming back, which has already been rejected 3 times, with some additional domestic legislation which the government could have brought forward on things like workers' rights over the last 9 years. The political reality is that the Prime Minister's deal is not going to pass in this House unless there is a guarantee of a second referendum. So why is the Prime Minister willing to risk her deal as opposed to reaching this compromise?
What I want to see is this House voting that we will leave the European Union with a deal. I have compromised, I have moved on the issues that have been raised as concerns by members across this House. There are 2 elements of the deal with the European Union, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. We've made clear we'll be seeking changes to the political declaration to reflect the package that I have put to the House today. I believe that it is important for this House to make decisions on this matter and to ensure that we can deliver on the result of the 2016 referendum, but to do it with a good deal.
Anna McMorrin.
Thank you. Can I strongly urge the Prime Minister to look across this House and understand, as I'm sure she does, that there is no majority for any version of Brexit compromise and therefore her bill, which is causing so much harm to our businesses, our communities and our democracy. So the only way to avoid the threat of no deal and get this bill passed is to put that confirmatory vote back to the people for that democratic say.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, she talks about the impact of the situation we're in on British business. And yes, uncertainty is never good for business. Business always wants to have the certainty of knowing the way forward. But what she is proposing will not remove that uncertainty from British business. It will increase... No, I'm sorry to the Honourable Lady. It will increase the period of uncertainty for the British people. Anything that extends the point of decision-making actually increases that uncertainty and leaves us for a further period of time. But it will be for this House. If the Honourable Lady is certain of her arguments, she should not be worried about the House having the opportunity to hear those arguments and make a decision.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister confirm, given that she's indicated she'll publish a new workers' rights bill, whether the publication of that bill is reliant on the Withdrawal Agreement Bill being passed? Because it seems to me that the House could decide to pass this bill, the workers' rights bill, and not the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Could she also say how it would work in practice? And I'm thinking specifically on rights for workers in the gig economy, where Europe seems to be offering better and stronger protections than those that our government has proposed in relation to the Taylor report.
Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, what will happen is that the Withdrawal Agreement Bill will be published, the Draft Workers' Rights Bill will be published, and we see these progressing in tandem.
Alex Sobel.
Speaker, the Prime Minister's repeatedly talked about having a democratic mandate. However, the ICO found repeated data breaches of Cambridge Analytica's work for vote leave, and Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, said, if we allow cheating in our democratic process, what about next time? What about time after that? This is a breach of the law, this is cheating, this is an irreversible change, the constitutional settlement of this country. And doesn't she really need a democratic mandate for this withdrawal agreement, considering how tampered and damaged the campaign was in the last referendum?
Well, can I say to the Honourable Gentleman that he refers to issues in relation to the conduct of the last referendum. Of course, the Electoral Commission took a number of issues, have taken a number of issues to and acted on a number of those issues. But if we look across at what has happened, we saw one of the most significant exercises in democracy in our history from people who came out to vote on the referendum. And can I actually say that what he's saying is that you can't actually trust the British people to exercise their vote according to their judgment and their instincts. I believe that's what the British people did, and we should listen to them.
Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, in her prequel to this statement, the Prime Minister referred euphemistically to the devolved lock that was to come forward as part of this bill. But her comments didn't stretch as far as whether legislative consent would be required by the devolved administration. So can the Prime Minister confirm that she accepts that legislative consent will be required by this bill and that she will accept the mandate that is given to her from the Scottish Parliament as to whether or not they will grant legislative consent for this bill?
The honourable gentleman is, I'm sure, very clear about the legislative consent requirements that relate to both the Scottish Government and, of course, the Welsh Government in relation to these matters. But, of course, I'm well aware that the Scottish Government has made clear that they don't want to give legislative consent to matters that are put forward in relation to this matter. But we will be discussing with the Scottish Government when the time comes.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, what is the purpose of bringing a withdrawal agreement marked 4 if no attempt has been made to address the backstop that continues to be a key obstacle to any way forward? Prime Minister, can I reiterate again very firmly but gently, we seek and need protection for Northern Ireland that is both legally binding and time limited. So what talks, what effort has been made to address the backstop?
Well, Prime Minister, to the honourable gentleman, and obviously he's raised this point with me on a number of occasions. We have had, as he knows, a number of discussions with the European Union that have led to further commitments that have been given in relation to alternative arrangements, for example, and we will enshrine those also in UK domestic legislation. The key issue about the separation from Great Britain and Northern Ireland is one that we have committed to be dealing with, and as I said in my statement, we will work with our confidence and supply partners, the DUP, to look at how that can best be enshrined and that commitment can best be enshrined in law.
Thank you. Order. Statement, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Secretary Dr. Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to make a statement about British Steel. It was announced this morning that the Court has granted an application by the directors of British Steel to enter an insolvency process. Control of the company will now pass to the official receiver, an employee of the Insolvency Service, who will run a compulsory liquidation. The official receiver has made clear that British Steel employees will continue to be paid and employed, and the business will continue to trade and supply its customers whilst he considers the position of the company. In fact, employees were paid early, with the May payroll being run yesterday, through cash being advanced by the company's lenders. As the House will recall, I made a statement on the 1st of May, setting out details of a bridging facility that the government agreed to provide to ensure that British Steel was able to meet its obligations under the EU emissions trading scheme, which fell due on the 30th of April. The government provided the facility to purchase allowances worth £120 million against the security of 2019 ETS allowances, which are currently suspended pending ratification